Beyond the propaganda, the shock of Japanese women meeting you. So imagine you're a young woman in 1940s Japan. Your entire life, you've been told a terrifying story. A story about monsters from across the sea. These aren't mythical creatures from folklore. They are American soldiers, depicted as bloodthirsty demons, ogres with horns and fangs, hell-bent on unimaginable cruelty. This wasn't just a children's ghost story. It was a state-sponsored campaign of fear, drilled into the minds of every man, woman, and child. The Imperial Japanese government knew that to fuel its war machine, it needed absolute devotion and a terrifying enemy. The Kakuku Baihei, or American demon soldiers, became the ultimate boogeyman. Propaganda posters showed them as grotesque beasts with claws, preying on innocent Japanese families. Radio broadcasts filled the airwaves with chilling tales of their supposed barbarity. Newspapers ran fabricated stories of American savagery. The message was clear and relentless. Surrender is not an option. Capture meant a fate worse than death, especially for women. The government painted a horrifying picture of what would happen if the Americans landed on Japanese soil, a vision of pure, unrestrained violence and violation. This constant, pervasive fear was designed to ensure that the Japanese people would fight to the last person, choosing death over what they believed was certain dishonor and torture. This propaganda had devastating real-world consequences. On the islands of Saipan and Okinawa, as American forces closed in, the lies reached their tragic peak. Japanese soldiers and government officials told the civilian population that the approaching Americans would inflict unspeakable horrors upon them. They warned that women would suffer the most. Faced with this terrifying choice, thousands of civilians, including entire families, made a heartbreaking decision. They climbed to the high cliffs overlooking the sea, and rather than face the demons they'd been taught to fear, they chose to end their own lives. These places, now known as Suicide Cliff and Banzai Cliff, stand as somber monuments to the deadly power of misinformation. The people who died there weren't just casualties of war. They were victims of a psychological battle fought with lies. For the Japanese women who did end up in American custody, their minds were filled with these ghost stories. They had been told, in graphic detail, what to expect. They believed they would be subjected to brutal, systematic assaults, and then killed in the most gruesome ways imaginable. The propaganda had been so effective that they had a clear, nightmarish script playing in their heads. They envisioned being herded into camps only to be tortured for sport by hulking, monstrous soldiers. They had heard that the Americans were animals who lacked any semblance of humanity or compassion. The fear was not just of death, but of a slow, agonizing descent into humiliation and pain before the inevitable end. This was the mental landscape of every woman who found herself a prisoner of war. Given this terror, many Japanese women took desperate precautions. It was common for them to carry hidden blades, razors, or even small daggers sewn into the linings of their kimonos. Some carried vials of poison. These weren't intended as weapons to fight off the enemy. They were tools for a final act of self-preservation. The plan was to take their own lives the moment capture seemed imminent, or at the first sign of the brutality they were conditioned to expect. The blades were a last resort, a way to reclaim control over their own fate and escape the imagined horrors. It was a testament to the depth of their indoctrination that they saw suicide as the only honorable and logical way out. Their greatest fear wasn't the enemy soldier. It was what he represented in their minds. So when the moment of first contact finally came, the reaction was one of pure, paralyzing terror. Imagine standing face to face with the monster you've been taught to fear your entire life. For many Japanese women, seeing an American soldier for the first time was a surreal and horrifying experience. They froze, unable to move or speak. Some fainted from sheer shock. They braced themselves for the blow that never came, for the brutality that never materialized. They saw tall, imposing figures, but they didn't see horns or fangs. Yet, the psychological conditioning was so strong that reality struggled to break through the wall of fear. Every gesture, every word from the Americans was initially interpreted through the lens of propaganda. This was the climax of years of fear-mongering, a moment of silent, breathless dread where the myth of the monster was about to meet reality. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Instead of violence, the women were met with gestures of basic human decency. The American soldiers, many of whom were just young men far from home, offered them water. They gave them food from their own rations, things like chocolate and canned goods, items the women had never seen before. They tended to the wounded, gently dressing injuries with medical supplies. There were no shouts, no aggression, no sign of the diamond behavior they had been promised. The soldiers' actions were professional and often surprisingly gentle. They treated the children with kindness, sometimes trying to make them smile. This stark contrast between the expected horror and the actual reality was profoundly disorienting. For the Japanese women, this was a shock to their entire worldview. They had been prepared for monsters, but found men. And they couldn't stop staring. They observed the American soldiers with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and intense curiosity. They watched how they laughed with each other, how they smoked their cigarettes, how they cleaned their rifles. They were mesmerized by their physical appearance. Many were taller and had different facial features, hair, and eye colors than they were used to. The propaganda had dehumanized these men, but now, seeing them up close, their humanity was undeniable. The staring wasn't just about physical differences. It was an attempt to reconcile the monster of their imagination with the man standing before them. Every act of kindness was a crack in the foundation of their belief system. What truly astonished them was the concept of chivalry and respect for women, something entirely absent from the propaganda. American GIS would go out of their way to ensure the female prisoners were safe and cared for. They established separate, secure living quarters for women and children. They made sure they were fed first. If a soldier was being too loud or rowdy, an officer would often step in and tell him to be respectful. This level of consideration was completely alien to what they had been taught. In the world painted by imperial propaganda, women were nothing more than spoils of war. In the reality of the POW camps, they were treated with a dignity they never thought possible. This unexpected respect did more to dismantle the propaganda than anything else. Gradually, the walls of fear began to crumble. The women started to realize that the stories they had been told were lies. The demons were just soldiers, young men caught in a war, just like their own brothers, fathers, and husbands. This realization dawned slowly through small, repeated acts of humanity. A soldier sharing a family photo, another attempting to communicate with broken phrases and hand gestures, a medic patiently caring for a sick child. Each of these moments chipped away at years of indoctrination. The relief that came with this realization was immense, but it was also mixed with a sense of betrayal. They had been lied to by their own government, a lie that had cost the lives of so many. The tension began to ease, replaced by a quiet, cautious curiosity and the first fragile seeds of trust. Looking back, the story of these women is a powerful lesson in the dangers of propaganda and the resilience of the human spirit. It shows how easily fear and hatred can be manufactured to control a population. But it also reveals that direct, human-to-human contact is the most powerful antidote to that kind of poison. When the Japanese women saw the reality of the American soldiers, the myth of the demon was shattered. They weren't just staring at their former enemies. They were witnessing the collapse of a world built on lies and the beginning of a new, uncertain understanding. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, it is the simple acts of kindness and humanity that can change hearts and minds in the most profound ways. The visual shock, men like giants. The most immediate and overwhelming shock was their sheer size. One Japanese nurse, held as a POW, later wrote in her diary about the Americans, calling them men like giants, to the average Japanese woman of that era, who stood just under 5 feet tall. The sight of American soldiers, many of whom were 6 feet or taller, was utterly astonishing. It wasn't just their height. It was their whole physical presence. Broad shoulders, thick arms, muscular frames. They were built on a scale that seemed almost mythical. The Japanese soldiers they were used to seeing were often lean, wiry, and by the end of the war, emaciated from years of rationing and deprivation. In contrast, these Americans looked like they were carved from a different, larger mold. The simple act of one of them standing up or walking by was an event, a spectacle of human scale they had never witnessed. This profound physical difference was the first thing that captured their gaze and held it, a mixture of awe and intimidation. Then there were the colors. For a population accustomed to the uniform dark hair and dark eyes of their own people, the appearance of the Americans was a visual revolution. Suddenly, they were seeing men with hair the color of wheat fields under the sun, blonde, light brown, even red, and their eyes the color of the sky or the deep sea shades of blue and green that were so rare in Japan they were almost legendary. Imagine seeing a blue-eyed person for the very first time. It would be captivating. These features, which are common in the West, were exotic and mesmerizing. It was like characters from a foreign storybook had stepped into their reality. This wasn't just a racial difference. It was a sensory one. The combination of towering height and these startling new colors made the American soldiers seem like beings from another world. The women stared, trying to process this new spectrum of human appearance that had been completely absent from their lives until that very moment. Beyond their physical features, what the Americans wore was another source of silent fascination. Their uniforms spoke of a wealth and a world of plenty that was unimaginable in war-torn Japan. The GIS wore clean, sturdy clothing. Their shirts weren't patched or threadbare. Their trousers were crisp. Most strikingly, they had solid, well-made leather boots. For people who had been making do with worn-out clothes and simple straw sandals or cloth shoes for years, the sight of these robust boots was a powerful symbol. It represented a level of industrial strength and resource abundance that Japan simply didn't have. Every GI was a walking testament to America's prosperity. The contrast was stark and painful. While Japanese civilians and soldiers alike were struggling with scarcity, these foreign soldiers seemed to have an endless supply of everything, right down to the soles of their feet. Their attire wasn't just clothing. It was a uniform of abundance, and it was impossible not to stare at this tangible evidence of the world that had defeated them. Perhaps the most profound difference, however, was what the women described as a healthy glow. The American soldiers looked well-fed, their skin had color, their faces were full, and they moved with an energy that comes from good nutrition. This stood in stark, heartbreaking contrast to the Japanese soldiers the women had known, especially towards the end of the war. The Imperial Japanese Army was starving. Soldiers were skeletal, their faces gaunt, their bodies weakened by malnutrition and disease. The women had seen the physical toll of war and deprivation etched onto the faces of their own men. Now they were looking at the enemy, and the enemy was healthy. This wasn't just about physical attraction. It was a deeper, more visceral observation. The health of the American soldiers was a quiet, powerful statement about the vast difference in resources and living standards between the two nations. It was a visual confirmation of why the war was lost. Seeing that glow of health on the faces of their captors, while the memory of their own starving soldiers was still fresh, was a complex and deeply unsettling experience. So why couldn't they stop staring? It wasn't just one thing. It was everything, all at once. It was a collision of worlds. On one hand, there was a natural, almost childlike curiosity. They were seeing new types of people, new colors, and a new scale of human being for the first time. It was a spectacle that was impossible to ignore, like seeing a rare animal at a zoo. But beneath that curiosity lay a deep, complicated layer of emotion. There was fear, certainly. These were the men who had defeated their country, the devils from the propaganda posters. Their size and strength were intimidating. Yet, there was also a sense of wonder and perhaps even a flicker of relief. The propaganda had promised monsters, but these men, while giant and strange, didn't always act monstrously. Some were young, barely out of their teens, some smiled. Some offered food or cigarettes. The act of staring was an attempt to reconcile the terrifying image from the propaganda with the complex human reality standing before them. It was a silent, intense process of re-evaluation, trying to understand their new situation and the men who now controlled their fate. In their fixed gaze, you can see the entire story of the war's end, the shock of defeat, the fear of the unknown, and the dawning realization that the world was much larger and more complicated than they had ever been led to believe. The diaries and memoirs of these women offer an incredibly unique and human perspective on a monumental historical event. They remind us that history isn't just about battles and treaties. It's about the deeply personal moments of shock, awe, and human connection that happen in their wake. It's about the quiet moments when all you can do is stare, as your entire understanding of the world changes right before your very eyes. The gentle barbarians, acts of unexpected kindness. Imagine being taught your entire life that the enemy is a savage beast. For the Japanese women and children captured on islands like Saipan and Okinawa, this was their reality. They were terrified, bracing for the worst. But instead of brutality, they were met with something utterly perplexing: gentleness. American soldiers, these so-called barbarians, approached them not with aggression, but with care. They would gently guide the weak, carry the exhausted children, and speak in calm, reassuring tones, even though their words couldn't be understood. This stark contrast between propaganda and reality was the first crack in the fortress of fear and hatred. For these women, seeing an enemy soldier handle a child with tenderness or offer a steadying hand to an elder was an act so unexpected, it bordered on the surreal. It was a silent message that said, "You are safe." Then came the miracle of the key rations. In the midst of scarcity and hunger, these American soldiers did something unthinkable. They shared their own food. Picture this: a soldier, far from home, opens his ration pack and instead of eating it all himself, he breaks off a piece of a chocolate bar and hands it to a wide-eyed, frightened Japanese child. Or he opens a can of peaches, a rare luxury, and offers it to a nursing mother. These weren't grand gestures on a political stage. They were simple, personal acts of compassion. For the Japanese prisoners who were accustomed to extreme deprivation, this was astonishing. Food was survival, and sharing it with an enemy was an act of profound humanity. The sweet taste of chocolate or the juice of a canned peach became more than just nourishment. It was a taste of peace, a symbol that their captors saw them not as enemies, but as fellow human beings in need. Perhaps one of the most powerful displays of this unexpected humanity occurred in the makeshift medical tents. The battlefields were filled with wounded from both sides. Japanese soldiers and civilians, injured and left behind, expected no mercy. Yet, American medics and doctors worked tirelessly to save them. They treated horrific wounds, administered scarce medicine, and performed life-saving surgeries on the very people who, just hours before, had been trying to kill them. There are countless accounts of Japanese soldiers waking up in a clean field hospital, their wounds bandaged, utterly bewildered to find that an enemy doctor had saved their life. This wasn't about strategy or gaining intelligence. It was about upholding a fundamental medical oath to preserve life, regardless of uniform. For the Japanese women watching this, seeing their countrymen treated with such professional care by the enemy was a powerful testament to a shared code of ethics that transcended the conflict. Sometimes, the most profound connections are made without a single word. In the tense, quiet moments in the POW camps, a simple object became a bridge between two worlds: the cigarette. American G's had them, and many Japanese, both soldiers and civilians, were desperate for a smoke after weeks of stress and deprivation. A soldier might walk over to a group of silent, wary prisoners, pull out a pack of cigarettes, and offer them around. He'd light one for a Japanese man. Their hands might briefly touch, And in that small exchange, a silent conversation took place. It was a moment of shared, simple pleasure, a recognition of a common human habit. This cigarette diplomacy broke the ice in a way no interpreter could. It was a gesture that said, "I see you. We are different, we are enemies, but in this moment, we can share this." It was a tiny spark of normalcy in the madness of war. In the chaos that followed the fighting, law and order completely broke down on many islands. Looting and violence were rampant, and women and children were especially vulnerable. In this dangerous vacuum, many U.S. soldiers took on an unexpected role: protector. Instead of exploiting the situation, they actively shielded the Japanese women and children from harm, sometimes from other desperate civilians, or even from rogue elements within their own ranks. Soldiers would stand guard outside compounds where women were housed, ensuring their safety. They created safe zones, distributed resources fairly, and went out of their way to establish a sense of security. For Japanese women who had been told these men were their greatest threat, seeing them become their guardians was a complete reversal of their worldview. It proved that the character of these individual men was stronger than the hatred demanded by war. But what truly dismantled the wall of hatred, brick by brick, was the simple power of a smile. After all the propaganda, the fear, and the violence, the one thing the Japanese prisoners never expected was to see an American soldier smile at them. Not a smirk of victory, but a genuine, disarming smile of friendship. A soldier might see a child crying and make a funny face to try and cheer them up. He might offer a piece of candy with a warm grin. These simple human expressions cut through the language barrier and the years of indoctrination. A smile is a universal sign of goodwill, and in that context, it was revolutionary. It communicated safety, kindness, and a lack of malice more effectively than any order or proclamation. For women who couldn't stop staring at these gentle barbarians, the smile was the final, irrefutable proof that the monsters they feared did not exist. Instead, they found men complicated, tired, but fundamentally decent men, caught in the gears of war just like them. The experiences of these Japanese women prisoners offer a profound lesson. They show that even in the darkest of times, in the heart of the most brutal conflicts, our shared humanity can shine through. The acts of kindness from American soldiers sharing food, tending to wounds, offering protection, and simply smiling were not part of any official policy. They were individual choices made by individual men. These choices challenged the very foundation of wartime hatred and left an indelible mark on those who witnessed them. They couldn't stop staring because what they saw was unbelievable. The enemy had a human face. This story reminds us that compassion is a force more powerful than any weapon. A new perspective on manhood, chivalry versus Bushido. First, let's talk about the idea of manhood. For these Japanese women, raised under the rigid code of Bushido, a man was supposed to be stoic, stern, and unyielding. Emotion was weakness. The samurai ideal was one of fierce discipline and a willingness to die for honor. Now picture their confusion when they saw the American G.I.s. These soldiers were different. They were chivalrous. They'd hold doors, offer a helping hand without being asked, and treat the women with a gentle respect that was utterly foreign. Instead of the cold, hard authority they expected, they found a kind of protective courtesy. It wasn't about dominance. It was about decency. This simple act of holding a door was a culture shock, a crack in the foundation of everything they'd been taught about men, especially enemy men. Then there was the sheer casualness of the American soldiers. The G's lounged around, they joked, they laughed loudly and freely. They didn't walk with the stiff, formal posture of the Japanese military. Their confidence wasn't rigid and forced. It was relaxed and natural. To the women, who were used to a society where every movement and expression was carefully controlled, this was bizarre. How could these men, who had just won a brutal war, be so laid back? This relaxed demeanor wasn't a sign of weakness or a lack of discipline. Instead, it projected an effortless strength, a comfort in their own skin that was both intriguing and disarming. They seemed to carry their authority lightly, not as a heavy burden of honor, but as a simple fact of their role. Perhaps one of the most jarring sights for the Japanese women was seeing American men do what was considered women's work. Back in Japan, the lines between gender roles were drawn in stone. Men did not cook. Men did not do laundry. Men certainly did not mend their own clothes. But in the POW camps, the women saw American soldiers doing all of these things without a second thought. They'd see a big, burly GI peeling potatoes for dinner or stitching a button back onto his shirt. This wasn't just a surprise. It was a fundamental challenge to their understanding of the world. It suggested a society where roles were more fluid, where a man's masculinity wasn't threatened by performing a domestic chore. It was a silent but powerful statement about equality and partnership that they had never encountered before. One of the biggest fears for any prisoner of war is being forced into hard, degrading labor. The women expected to be put to work in fields or factories under threat of punishment. But that rarely happened. The American policy was generally not to force civilian internees or female POWs into toil. Instead of being treated like slave labor, they were largely left to manage their own time within the confines of the camp. They were given rations, shelter, and medical care. This lack of forced labor and physical abuse was perhaps the most profound shock. The propaganda had promised cruelty, but the reality was a baseline of human decency. The guards didn't see them as tools to be used, but as people to be managed and cared for until the war was officially over. This humane treatment, this respect for their basic dignity as captives, was a powerful counter-narrative to years of hate-filled rhetoric. And then there was the laughter. American humor was a complete mystery. The G's would laugh at things that made no sense to the Japanese women. They'd tell jokes, pull light-hearted pranks on each other, and erupt into boisterous laughter that echoed through the camp. In a culture where public displays of emotion were suppressed and formality was paramount, this open and frequent laughter was baffling. Was it a sign of madness, arrogance? They couldn't understand the context or the punchlines, but they could see the camaraderie it created. Over time, they began to see it not as mockery, but as a coping mechanism, a way of building bonds and maintaining morale. It was another piece of the puzzle, showing a different way of being, a different way of facing the world, not with grim stoicism, but with a resilient sense of humor. Slowly but surely, all these observations led to a single revolutionary realization. As one former POW later recalled, the thought that began to spread among the women was simple. They are humans just like us. The enemy, the barbaric demons, had been stripped of their monstrous caricature and revealed to be just men. Men who could be kind, who could be relaxed, who could cook their own meals, and who laughed with their friends. They weren't a monolithic force of evil, they were individuals. This humanization was the most powerful force in breaking down the walls of hatred and fear. It showed that despite different cultures, languages, and the brutal conflict that had separated them, a shared humanity remained. The staring wasn't just curiosity. It was the dawning of a new understanding. It was the moment they stopped seeing an enemy and started seeing a person. This story isn't just a historical footnote. It's a powerful reminder of how direct human contact can dismantle even the most entrenched propaganda. It shows that kindness can be a more powerful weapon than any gun, and that this simple act of seeing another person as a fellow human being can change the world. The experiences of these Japanese women POWs offer a timeless lesson in empathy and the surprising ways we find common ground, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The aftermath. From enemies to allies. This first encounter was a powerful moment that would ripple through the decades to come. It was the first crack in the wall of hatred built by years of war. In that shared glance, in that offered piece of chocolate, the long journey from enemies to allies truly began. The Japanese women, who had been prepared to die, were instead given a reason to hope. The American G is far from home and weary of war, found a shared humanity in the eyes of their former enemies. They weren't just soldiers and prisoners anymore. They were people, witnessing the birth of a fragile peace. This was the moment the history books often miss, not a treaty signing, but a human connection that defied everything they had been taught to believe. In the quiet of the barracks, something remarkable started happening. Pen was put to paper. Women who had been cut off from the world for years began writing letters home, letters that carried a truth far different from the official narrative. They wrote about the Americans, but they didn't describe monsters. They described the soldier who gave his own jacket to a shivering child. They wrote about the medic who worked tirelessly, treating Japanese and Allied prisoners with the same gentle hands. They described men who smiled, who tried to speak a few broken words of Japanese, who shared pictures of their own families back home. These letters were a revelation to their families. They were personal testimonies that dismantled the government's propaganda piece by piece. Each letter that made its way out of the camps was like a seed of truth planted in the soil of a nation grappling with defeat. Families read these accounts with a mix of shock and relief. Could it be true? Could the American devils really be this human? The stories spread from neighbor to neighbor in hushed conversations. They told of G as who played baseball with the local kids, who helped clear rubble, and who treated women with a respect that was, in that moment, utterly disarming. This wasn't a grand political strategy. It was something far more powerful. It was the simple, undeniable truth of human decency, shared through the most personal and trusted medium, a letter from a loved one. These letters weren't just correspondence. They were the first drafts of a new history between two nations. As the American occupation of Japan began, these initial, tentative encounters blossomed into a defining feature of the post-war era. The same soldiers the women had stared at in the camps were now a common sight on the streets of Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, and the interactions continued to defy all expectations. The image of the American GI handing out chewing gum and chocolate to children became iconic. Jimu Chakuretto became a common refrain among kids, a symbol of this strange new relationship. These small acts of generosity went a long way in a country ravaged by scarcity. It wasn't about charity, it was about connection. It showed a side of the conquerors that was approachable, even friendly. These daily interactions chipped away at the ingrained fear and suspicion. Japanese citizens saw American military police directing traffic with surprising politeness. They saw soldiers helping to rebuild infrastructure, working alongside the very people they had been fighting just months before. This period, known as the occupation, could have been one of bitterness and resentment. Instead, thanks to these grassroots human connections, it became a period of unprecedented cultural exchange. The Americans brought jazz, movies, and democratic ideals. The Japanese, in turn, began to share their rich culture with a fascinated new audience. The foundations of the modern US-Japan alliance weren't forged in high-level government meetings, but on the street corners and in the marketplaces, in the shared smiles between former enemies. Out of this extraordinary time came one of the most unexpected and lasting legacies of the war brides. These were the Japanese women who fell in love with and married American soldiers. For the women who had first seen these men in the POW camps, the idea would have been unthinkable. Yet, love has a way of defying politics and prejudice. These relationships were not easy. They faced immense social stigma from both sides. Japanese families often disowned their daughters for marrying a former enemy. In America, these women faced racism and the challenge of adapting to a completely alien culture. Many of these couples met through work, with Japanese women being hired as secretaries, translators, or maids on US bases. Daily proximity turned into friendship, and friendship, for many, blossomed into love. These unions were powerful symbols of reconciliation. They were a testament to the idea that individual human connection can triumph over national conflict. Each marriage was a bridge, a personal, living link between two cultures that had been locked in a death struggle. The stories of these war brides are stories of incredible courage and resilience. They left everything they knew for a future with the men they loved, becoming pioneers of a new, multicultural identity. Over 45,000 Japanese women married American G's during and after the occupation. Their children, the first generation of Japanese Americans born from these unions, embodied the fusion of these two worlds. These families were the ultimate proof that the war was truly over, replaced by a bond that was personal, profound, and permanent. The healing of a nation as shattered as post-war Japan is a monumental task. While economic aid and political reforms like the Marshall Plan in Europe and MacArthur's policies in Japan were crucial, they don't tell the whole story. The true healing, the kind that mends the spirit of a people, happens at the grassroots level. It happens in the unscripted, everyday interactions between individuals. The story of Japan's recovery is inextricably linked to the human decency shown by ordinary GIs. When a soldier shares his rations, he's not just providing food. He's communicating a message of shared humanity. When he takes the time to learn a child's name, he's rebuilding trust, one person at a time. These were not policy directives. There was no official be nice to the locals manual that could account for this groundswell of goodwill. It came from the soldiers themselves, young men who were tired of fighting and saw in the faces of the Japanese people not a defeated enemy, but fellow human beings suffering the consequences of war. They saw mothers struggling to feed their children, elderly people displaced from their homes, and a society in desperate need of hope. By responding with compassion instead of contempt, they became unofficial ambassadors of peace. This human-to-human diplomacy was arguably more effective than any treaty. It replaced the narrative of hate with a new one based on mutual respect and cooperation, laying the psychological foundation upon which Japan could rebuild itself, not just as a country, but as a member of the global community. Looking back, the story of the Japanese women in the POW camps and their first encounters with American soldiers offers a profound and timeless lesson. It's a powerful reminder that behind the uniforms, the flags, and the political rhetoric, we are all just people. War has a way of dehumanizing the other, of turning complex human beings into simple hateable caricatures. Propaganda feeds this fire, making it easier to commit acts of violence against a faceless enemy. But what these stories show us is that the most powerful antidote to this poison is direct human connection. When you look someone in the eye, when you share a piece of bread, when you see a picture of their family, the entire edifice of hatred begins to crumble. The enemy suddenly has a face, a name, a story. In our world today, which is still so rife with conflict and division, this lesson is more important than ever. It's easy to demonize those who are different, those who live on the other side of a border or believe in a different ideology. But history teaches us that peace is not solely the domain of politicians and generals. It is built by ordinary people who have the courage to see the humanity in one another, even in the most difficult of circumstances. The greatest anti-war tool we have is not a weapon, but an open hand and an open heart. The unexpected bonds forged in the ashes of World War II are a testament to this truth. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more hidden histories.